Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first DEI After 5 live. I am so excited about this conversation because we were planning one, but then, life happens and things happen, and we just knew that this had to be a topic that we covered sooner than later. So we're going to dive right in a minute. Look, see you in a few.
Welcome to a special edition of DEI After 5 with Sacha. New episodes of DEI After 5 drop every Tuesday on YouTube. But tonight, DEI After 5 is live. And now, here's your host, Sacha Thompson.
Hello again and welcome everyone. I am thrilled to have you all with us tonight. This is the first time we're going live, but it's a topic that I think is so critical for us to have in this DEI space. And so tonight I have two guests with me, Dr. Janice Gassam Asare and Christina Ashley Williams. And we'll kind of talk about how this came about, and we'll just have a great conversation tonight because I think there's so much that can come out of having a conversation about some of the inequities that lots of Black and Brown founding organizations have to deal with in this space. So welcome, Janice. Welcome, Christina.
Hello.
Hello. How are you all doing, first of all?
I literally just got out of a training from like that. I've been running all day. We had our anti-racism accelerator, and it was good and rich and inspiring.
Oh, good.
That's awesome.
Good.
So nice to meet you, Christina.
I know. Finally getting some FaceTime.
Yeah.
We were just saying that too. And hopefully you have your beverage to get through this.
So. Could be coffee, could be wine.
Right? Who knows?
Yeah.
So I want to start with kind of what led all of this off. Right. So there was an article that came out a couple of days ago about a startup, that is in the DEI space that was using AI to do some of the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so Janice then did a post and an article. So the article's there to talk about, why this is a challenge. And so we wanted to bring this article to life, because I know, Christina, you and Janice have had this conversation before, right? So Janice, I want you to start off and just kind of talk to us about the post that started all of this.
Yeah, I am so happy that I'm here with you ladies having this conversation. So it actually started when, I'm sure both of you may be familiar with Dr. Samantha Ray, but we're friends, and she had texted me. It was early in the morning, I remember that, and she had texted me, and it was the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes. I checked my phone, I turned my alarm off, and she had texted me, and she said, "Did you see this article?" So I read through the article, and my mind was blown, and I just thought back to Christina, and I had a chance to talk, I interviewed Christina for Forbes, where she expanded on this exact same thing, and I know Christina had a video that had a lot of traction here on LinkedIn, where she talked about this exact same thing. And what made me angrier was reading through the article. It wasn't just that a white-led DEI firm was getting $6.5 million of VC funding. It was the fact that they're using AI software to help companies diagnose their DEI pain points. And there's so much research out there about how problematic AI can be, and how we really have to be careful, because AI can just sort of regurgitate the same biases that we're trying to mitigate. And I just think it's really interesting, because I never hear these stories talking about all of us have DEI consultancies, and I never see these sorts of the same sort of like attention and resources being poured into our businesses. And Dr. Sam and I were doing like research into the creators of this particular platform, and I'm going to leave them nameless, since I already got a ding on LinkedIn, and I don't have any lawsuits. But we did research into the background, and the founder is actually she has a tech background. She doesn't have any sort of anti-oppression background. And, you know, not saying that that's absolutely necessary, but I think that it seems on the surface, it looks very like, hey, I see an industry where I can make a lot of money and I could capitalize on the interest and what's going on. And I just see like we all, you know, are seeing
like, are you colonizing oppression right now? Like, is that what you're doing? You're just like, oh, there's an opportunity for me to get in where I fit in. Like, no, you don't fit here. Stop. Stop.
No, that's exactly it. And I think what is frustrating is like the silencing. If I were them, if I was a visitor in a space and trying to really dismantle oppression, I would listen to and pass the mic to people that actually experience it. And if there's multiple people, I'm not the only person who said this, if there's multiple people saying something and giving you a criticism or giving you a piece of feedback, you would think that rather than trying to silence us, they would say, hey, I saw your post where you tagged us. Could you illuminate? Yeah, let's have a conversation. And I think I would have had much more respect than like reporting the post to LinkedIn and getting it down. Because I'm not the only one. But Dr. Sam made a post too, and she didn't tag the company, so hers didn't get taken down, but she got a lot of messages from people who were saying, I reached out to the company prior to them getting this VC funding because I thought that they're, you know, the algorithmic bias, like how are they overcoming that? And I questioned them, they blocked me or they tried to ignore me. So it's like they are not, to me, serious about what it is that they're doing because they're not even listening to any voices, any marginalized voices who are giving them feedback.
Yeah. And Christina, I want to ask you, because you're in this space, right? You are doing this. And I remember the post that you did a few months ago, kind of talking about this. So talk about that for a little bit and kind of tie it into the present day, right?
Okay. Okay. So one thing that's just like coming up for me really heavily is advancing technology to solve for problems in this space isn't necessarily like novel or new. Plenty of people have been doing it. Plenty of Black-led organizations have been doing it, even with artificial intelligence. If we're checking out work by Blindor or Canaries or Valence, like it's not like there are not organizations that have been doing the work. It's just that who is getting largest amount of funding and who is getting recognition and like the big ahas and to-dos in the press are coming by white-led firms that are doing work in spaces where they're not experiencing the oppression. If we talk about how racism shows up in our world around us, especially when we're thinking about the machine learning and the artificial intelligence, it's very simple to see the problem. Let me give you a little example. Bust out your phone. Go to your web browser. Type in unprofessional hair in images and tell me what pops up for you.
Yeah. I had a conversation with somebody about that today. Like, how are we defining professional?
I didn't make that up. What you pull up on your phone, the list of images that shows up on your phone right now was a result of two things. One, an engineer that coded the algorithm to show these appearances, and or two, machine learning that interpreted information that it got off the internet to create what it found as a accurate result to pull up these responses. So one, it's learning from human behavior and how we act online, disgustingly, or it's learning from the biases that was designed into the code that was programmed.
Yeah.
When we're thinking about the evolution of human connection, if we're thinking about what diversity, equity, inclusion is, what we're saying is we want to build empathy amongst one another. What I am so baffled by is the fact that we keep trying to insert robots into building people skills. We are literally saying, hey, go watch this video. Now you're not a racist. Right? We're asking people to build empathy without actually interacting and collaborating and communicating with other humans. How does that even work? Why on earth would you say, let me go and spend all this money on some advanced technology to try to solve problems for a demographic of people that I could literally just go have a freaking conversation with? I could literally just invite in and get their insight on the design process on how to close these gaps. It would be that simple.
You know, it's interesting because there's so much that's coming up for me right now, because I was in tech for 10 years, right? Doing marketing and working with groups. And the last place that I worked, these were the topics that we would talk about. And it was very interesting that some of the voices that would challenge some of the work, I was told, you know, oh, well, they're not friendly to us. Like, that's not their job to be friendly to you. Their job is to tell you where you have blind spots. Their job is to tell you, like, these are the gaps in which your machine learning or your AI is not seeing. This is where diversity and inclusion within the tech industry, within your engineers, the people that are actually building is important, right? Those are the conversations that we need to have. But because it may not have put the company in the best light, then I was, you know, we're not going to have it. And I think that I would rather a company be transparent about their gaps and what they're not doing and how they're trying to fix it than to hide it behind just having the great stories come out.
Yeah.
Right. Because again, someone that's been in marketing, like, I can read PR spin, and I live in the DC area. I know political spin when I see it
right.
quickly.
Yeah.
And so there were certain things that just didn't sit well with my soul, because I'm like, I know the team that's building this, and no one on that team looks like me. Right. So don't tell me that there's no bias, because there is. It's going to be automatically built in.
If you have bias in the hiring process, what makes me think you're going to not have bias in your engineering process? That makes zero sense.
Right. And I'm just like, who are these engineers who are because I'm just like, who do you think that you can just like, there are so many levels to like that particular company getting funding, and reading what the company is about is like on their website, it says one of the purposes to creating this AI system is to help companies figure out how to make racially marginalized employees more productive. That's one of the goals. So I'm like confused on like the purpose of creating this system. Secondly, I'm also confused about like why you feel like the people that you're hiring to do this work are not doing it efficiently enough. I think that it's nice to have AI software because you have a scapegoat now. If your programs aren't working, you can blame it on the AI and say, oh, well, we tried it and the algorithm, like, what do you do with like like so many levels, you know? And one person that I interviewed for the article said, how are you going to help companies figure out their DEI pain points when you've never experienced the particular type of oppression that you are helping companies solve for? Like, and I'm sick of, like, I see a lot of this where people trust and value white people even when it comes to our own oppression. It's like they're experts of, we're not even experts of our own oppression
experience.
So it's just like mind-boggling why these VCs, because to me it's so obvious. I'm like, why would you invest money in this? Do you think that this is gonna like revolutionize what's going on? And another thing I think that's important is that these founders are not from the US. And I think that racism operates very differently here in the US. It's similar in Europe and in different countries, but in Canada, it does not operate in the same way that it operates here. We have a very specific history within this country. And I think that that's also an added layer. It's just like so many layers.
It's so many layers. So we actually have a couple of comments. So let's see if we can get the first one to come in. Laziness is built in. We're talking about people who literally went around the planet killing and enslaving people. So I guess not doing the work is deep in the DNA. Ooh, Mervin, I knew he would come through with the comments, right? It's interesting because there was something that was said just now around Well, one, racism shows up very differently in different places, right? And I was going to add on to this conversation. I'm like, it has to be its own show, is like what's happening right now in Florida, in Georgia around these laws and what they're saying about what can be taught to students around Black and Brown experiences in the United States, right? That mindset is still what's happening in tech, right? And so it's you can't disconnect the two without that. And so Shay B. Rio says, but the learning is largely Black people. Simone Biles' hair and all the kids, yep. Kids getting kicked out over dreadlocks. And my personal experience with short locks, natural to locks. Yeah. And some of that is just ingrained supremacy, right? What do we normalize as acceptable, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like ironic in this space because the very purpose of this space being created is to help companies figure out how to interrupt and dismantle these systems that continue to marginalize people. And they're just like, the systems are just recreating themselves. Yeah. And I don't know if I don't believe the ignorance. Like, I don't let people play the ignorance card. Like, oh, they didn't know. Or, oh, they don't know. Like, there's enough people who have had conversations with these founders or have given them critiques. And it's not just them. It's like these companies keep popping up. And what's really interesting that I see is I feel like they see the work that we are doing, and conveniently very similar consultancy pop up. And they say, oh, Christina's doing this at her consultancy. Maybe we should do something similar. Or, oh, Sacha's doing this, with her company. I think we could take some of these ideas rather than like collaborating and working with people like us who have the lived experience and the like knowledge and understanding.
The degrees.
Also,
of
space. They're just like, no, we're going to create our own. And then we're going to get fun. I don't know. Is there a tambourine emoji?
We need one. But you're right, because it's and I say this often in my work, Black and Brown communities are built around community, right? It's in our DNA. When you look at Indigenous Black and Brown populations, right? It's a system of taking care of self. It's a system of, if I don't have, I'll give to my neighbor, however it is, it's a give and take, it's reciprocity. It's we take care of each other as a community, which is not necessarily the case when you talk about European-based countries, right? It's more an individual base. And so what we're seeing is this innate, and it's in our DNA, and there's research behind it, that I can definitely find around collaboration or competition.
Collaboration or competition.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's part of what we're seeing play out in today. It's, okay, how can I compete and how can I profit off of this without having the credentials per se to do this?
This is what we're fighting against. By design, the United States was created off of systems that value property rights over human rights, right? If you think about it, even in context of enslaved people that were here, they were seen as property. They were not seen as humans. Our banking system began off of the exchange of currency, which was human currency that was understood as property, right? So when we're thinking about business and product and service that feeds back into a bottom line, what's happening is this context of how do we focus on making money, because the property rights and the property value is more of an importance than the human experience. This is where my large critique comes from when we're thinking about specifically in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, because yes, of course, technology advances society, right? Of course, technology, artificial intelligence, and machine learning is important for doing certain things. However, when we are talking about human interaction, human connection, human evolution, especially with empathy building, you cannot do that by removing the humans from the equation. I have a question here. When we are thinking about the context of the United States, for example, if I am running a business in San Francisco and there is an HR director, if I'm in San Francisco, I am likely working at a tech company. I am likely recruiting engineers from India for this tech company. It's just the demographics. It's how it breaks down. Me as an HR director, am I familiar with the caste system and the cultural context that is also being infiltrated into my organizational culture here in San Francisco when there are examples of people in different positions and supervisory levels that are discriminating against one another because of a caste system that isn't necessarily directly relevant to my cultural context here in America? Am I knowledgeable enough to be able to say, you know what, I need to go and be trained around this context, right? Or if someone is reporting that something is happening to me because they're being discriminated against because of a caste that they belong to, how much awareness do I actually have? Is that AI going to teach me about that cultural competency? Hell no.
And we're operating under the assumption that the programmers from, let's say, these engineers who are in San Francisco, a lot of them are from other cultures and countries, have the understanding and awareness. Like, we're making assumptions that, oh, because it's a, maybe a person from a particular background that's programming it, a non-white person, that they have the understanding. And it's like, no, we're just reprogramming these systems to replicate our own biases. And I think that exactly what you said, Christina, it's so absurd to me that we think that machines will help us solve interpersonal issues. And this is the exact thing that I teach my students when I'm in class. I'm like, in HR in particular, I'm like, technology and AI is taking over the hiring and selection process and helping us go through resumes and all of that. But one thing that I think HR cannot do is resolve interpersonal conflicts. AI, we can't, how are you resolving the conflict that I have with this person? How are you making this person stop their microaggressive behaviors? How are you that's not something that AI can currently do. So I think that the whole business model is just not, to me, I'm not understanding what you're actually investing in, or what they're actually investing in, what they expect to get back, like a printout that says based on algorithm, they compile problems, and these are the suggested interventions. What happens if those don't work? Then what do you do?
Right.
And
like, you get another printout from the system.
Cool, you gave me this data. Great, I have this report. Now what do I do with it, right? Who is doing the training? Who is doing the redesign of the policies? Who is rewriting what the job descriptions look like? Regardless of whatever any technology says to us, like you were just saying, Janice, cool, you gave me some data points. There still has to be something that is done after that. And that has to come from a human. So fund humans, put money into the people that have dedicated themselves to this work, not only from their lived experience to survive in this country, but people literally have careers and education in this subject matter. Because I think this conversation also needs to happen too. Not everyone that has lived a person of color experience is ready or willing or as knowledgeable to be able to educate others on experiences of diversity, equity, inclusion. Because that's all that, not everyone wants to do that job. Also, too, a lived experience is one thing, but also there's education that comes behind it too, right? And understanding this relationship between systemic, institutional, and interpersonal harm that is caused and designed within our country, right?
So Christina, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off because there's two points that I want to talk to that you pointed out. One, there's an assumption that HR knows what they're doing, right? because not all HR folks are DEI folks.
80% of HR are white women. It's just like the teaching industry. So like, of course, there's a natural inclination to have a disconnect and distrust between your employees when it doesn't reflect the cultural competency in the leadership positions such as HR. It's like, sorry.
Right, no. But that's a piece of this, right?
Then they're teachers, like
exactly. That's a huge piece of this because, and again, I can tell you from my experience, the reason why I left corporate was because of a white woman in HR that had never done diversity work, that was leading diversity and inclusion for a huge organization, and felt threatened by the fact that I would call her out on stuff, and it wasn't publicly. I would do it as a colleague, but that threat. I then started to see like, oh, this is how the sausage is made, because now I'm seeing exactly the processes that HR go through to silence Black and brown voices and to make sure that they're pushed out of the system. So that's number one. Absolutely. The second part of this is it goes back to the capitalism piece of this. They're willing to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars for the technology. But then when that data is spit out, right? They offer pennies to Black and brown consultants to do the work, right? And so it's like, how do you balance the scale of that? I've had so many clients over the last, I don't know, couple of months where they've started, especially after this whole racial unrest in the US, right? They started with a consultant that did some work. And then now I'm coming in and they're just like, yeah, so we had unconscious bias training. And I'm like, okay, and what? Like, and was there a strategy? Like, what was the plan? How is this fitting into the larger picture? And so those are the things that technology cannot provide for you. Like, it cannot go in and tell you all of the nuances of what is truly happening in that company culture. Right. And so those are the things that I think people need to be aware of, is there's human error, and there's also this arrogance of because I'm in this position or in this role, I need to seem as if I know everything, and everything needs to align with where I am.
Oh, that's a good point. It's okay to be vulnerageous. In fact, we should embrace it. Be courageously vulnerable. That means you're leaning into the fact that you don't know everything, and it's okay. We're having teachable moments with one another. We're practicing a call-in culture rather than a call-out culture, inviting people to share their expertise about their own lived experiences and insights into the space so that there is a collective good that's occurring, right? Like if people feel as if their voice is valued and validated, then you're going to have a better result in the end, because it's a community-centered design at the end of the day, rather than just a top-down execution. Like, hey, we said you have to do X, Y. When we see top-down kind of like mandates, or where it's like a leadership team, for example, says like, hey, even if they're like, hey, you have to do this DEI training, that is also weird to me, because if who is at the top is most likely to be part of the dominant culture, and they're creating the trainings, what perspective is going into what the experiences of the people at the lower positions in the organization, who are most likely Black and brown people, going to be during that training, right? It should be something that's co-designed, not just across different demographic backgrounds, but across your different departments, right? Do you have people in different regions across the world or across the United States? Like, having the same ethnic background is so great, but are those experiences the same when you're going to different zip codes? Is my experience in Atlanta the same as someone's experience in Ohio?
Yeah.
Like,
there's so many layers to this.
Another thing that I think that like is, we were talking about collaboration, and I think there needs to be more of a willingness. Like, if you are in this space, you have to also be willing. You can't tell people how to dismantle oppression when people from marginalized backgrounds are giving you feedback. you're not willing to listen. That to me is not indicative of somebody who's actually like serious about creating changes. And also like this mindset of like, I'm not in competition with this company. I don't see other DEI consultancies as my competition. We see a problem and all of us are required to help fix the problem. So I don't know like what, I'm like, my mind is blown because I posted something on Instagram and I know some people I didn't tag the company. I know some people went to their profile and wrote things and they had messaged me and said, oh, they deleted my comments. And it's just like this, like, they put these, they cover their ears and they refuse to hear and listen to the feedback that people are giving them because it's this like scarcity mindset that people come into the space with who are trying to capitalize on the space. They feel like these people I'm not in competition with them. I see that your business model is heavily flawed. And if this was a business that I felt was like actually going to create change, I would still be gripe about the fact that VCs aren't investing in our companies like that. But at the end of the day, if it's going to create change, I'm for that, but it's the fact that it's like a problematic business model and they were granted millions of dollars. And it's like this idea that people come into this space trying to capitalize and not realizing we're all like here to create change and all of us are needed, but it's okay to call each other in and say, hey, that's not the way to do it. That's not the way to do it. And that just shows me like, you shouldn't be doing the work if you're not willing to take a moment and take a step back and like take the feedback.
And that's part of this, right? It's around the sensitivities. I'm not going to say that other F word about this work, because I think that is a huge piece of the problem, right? That people get their feelings hurt, and that's not the word I was thinking of. But they get their feelings hurt, and rather than taking it as constructive criticism that will help them learn and grow, it's the reaction is, what can I do to shut them down so I don't feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Right. And again, this is what we're seeing in our politics right now. Right. How do we stop this history? How do we stop talking about these things? Because I don't want to feel uncomfortable. Well, I'm like, well, guess what? I felt uncomfortable every damn day of my life in this country. Right. And that's coming as someone that was immigrated to this country as a child. Right. I held on to my citizenship until 2016 because at that time period, I was just like, oh, you know what? I don't know what this crazy man is about to do. Let me secure this because I already know that one's secured. Right. And so it's having that fear constantly in your workplace. That's a part of this problem. Like if your technology is not protecting the most vulnerable or the most marginalized, what are you really doing other than upholding the systems that are already in place? And that, I think, Janice, is kind of to your point around, like, if it's not doing what it's supposed to do, then why do it?
Yeah. It's you're perpetuating the problem. And when we think about colonization, we ran out of places on Earth to colonize, so they're going to space, right? And then they're creating the metaverse, right? They're thinking about now, that's what it seems like is happening within the DEI space, is like, okay, like we've got control of all these other industries. Here's one more for us to tap into. I have not seen a headline for a Black-led company within this space that has reached the numbers of these large white-led DEI-related companies are getting. And that is just abhorrent. It doesn't.
I think the closest one I can think of is Canaris. Like they made some, but it wasn't to that level, right? At least that I know of.
Praxis Lab has this amazing program. They do virtual reality training in this space. It's so lit. It's run by a Black and Asian woman, right? And they're amazing. They still haven't gotten the type of numbers that we saw, for example, I don't know if we're able to see that company, but another company that got $50 million.
Yep.
Right? Like that was run by two white dudes again. So like, it's just, come on. What are we doing?
So I want to do a pivot, because one of the things that, my mind is all over the place right now, because I think it is important for us to understand the history of DEI. And actually the DEI After 5 that came out earlier today talks about the history.
Oh, great.
And I sit down with a woman who's my cousin, but she's been in this space for 40 years, right? And part of that conversation has been, you got to remember this, most of this stuff kind of started around affirmative action.
Yeah.
Right? When you think about the start of this.
Benefits white women the most.
But when it started, it was supposed to benefit Black and brown people, right? It got usurped, right? And then, so the beneficiaries of it mostly were white women. Now we're in this DEI space where it was usurped. And the only reason we're having these conversations now around race is because somebody was murdered on television.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you think about what it took to kind of refocus the conversation, it took someone dying and all of us witnessing it for it to happen.
It took someone dying for Band-Aids to expand their color options on their freaking product.
Right.
Band-Aids.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wait, can you go back and tell us? I did not know that that's the reason why that they expanded the...
Yeah.
Of course. It's always at the expense of our pain and our death and our trauma.
So thank you, George Floyd, because now I can get a Band-Aid that matches my skin tone. This is how our industries work in this country.
And it's very, what's the word? We're not proactive, we're reactive, right? It's very reactive. And I think part of the challenge and part of the conversations that we're having is like, we're trying to be proactive in a lot of these discussions with companies.
Yeah.
But until there is pressure on the bottom line, they're not going to change anything. Right. So that being said, I want to do a little bit of a pivot to, so what can we do? Right. We are where we are. What are some things that companies should look out for? Folks that are startup founders in this space, what they can do. So Christina, I want to start with you, and then Janice will go to you.
What can we do? Read books. Okay, so in designing, I'm going to go from the framework of like designing an organizational culture from a startup perspective. There needs to be intentionality from the onset of developing your team. So that means there is a handbook and a policy in place where, hey, newsflash, if you're a startup, you're likely a CEO or in an executive position. So you get to design what your benefits and what your policies look like.
Yep. Yeah.
So you have a great opportunity to make it as attractive and inclusive as possible, meaning things like having flex days given per month for folk that need to have some extra me time. That's a huge benefit. Sometimes I don't feel like working because my cramps are so bad. That's my reality, but I'm not trying to use my PTO days. You know what I mean? I don't want to lose money because I'm cramping, but I'm physically in pain. Having intentionality on what we consider what professionalism looks like within our space. What does the language look like within the job descriptions? Are you using key signal words to tell potential hires what the values are that exist within your company that you're trying to attract to maintain within your company? Thinking about who is represented on your advisory board and on your board of directors, who is coming up with the design plan of what holidays look like. Are you celebrating Christmas because that's a default on what our workplaces have done for years and years? Are we also recognizing that there are many different holidays from many different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds that require different dates off throughout different parts of the year? Are we offering flex days for things like that? I think having intention around what your culture looks like from the beginning saves you so much heartache in the long run. And that doesn't just apply to what's happening amongst your people relationships. That also applies to how your organizational culture feeds into your service and your product design. Are you designing your products with an inclusive lens because the organization has a value set that requires, right, certain behaviors of what accessibility and inclusion looks like? So by default, the product manager is designing accessibility into the product development from the jump? Or is it something where you're like, oh, well, I'm going to like build fast and break things, and I'm going to go back and fix it? Is that, are we still doing that? Is that still what we're doing? Because I don't.
They're still doing that. They're still doing that.
Yeah, like we need to build better and fix the things. Okay, like there's a new opportunity that we have, and I'm a really, really, really big advocate for having feedback loops and having a culture that invites, as we've spoken about, collaboration and community, but has a design in the culture where you're inviting people into the construction of what your organization looks like and what your value sets continues to develop into, because you're hearing from all of the voices that are making it, right? Like that should be one of your questions when you're interviewing people. Like what are some of your cultural values, and how do you see yourself applying that within our community?
I love it. I love it. You know, and it's interesting. Something you said just now triggered a conversation I had earlier today, where it's so many of these companies, because they're moving so quickly to grow, just because someone's good at a job doesn't mean they're going to be a good manager, right? So even investing in like inclusive management of people is something that companies aren't doing, right? It's like, oh, you're good at that, so I'm going to give you 20 other people with 20 different personalities that you need to make successful, right? And just because you're successful does not mean that everyone's going to be successful in the same way. And so training people to actually be inclusive managers, doing that at the start of your business, I think is critical. Or if you have been in the place, all right, let's stop and pause, right? This is a training that everyone's going to go to, and this is the criteria. And these are the expectations, right? And the onus isn't put on the employee. The onus is put on that manager to be inclusive, right? The second thing was, it was just kind of shadows of psychological safety.
Yep.
Because if I don't feel comfortable even speaking up, right, I'm not going to tell you your product is flawed, because I don't feel comfortable, because there's going to be some type of pushback, or I'm going to be pushed out, or that's the problem child. Right. And we've seen that in tech companies, like very publicly happen, where Black and brown voices say, hey, there's a problem. And then the next thing you know, there's a LinkedIn post like, I've been sent off to you. So those are the two things that come up. So Janice, what are some things that you think can happen right now that organizations really need to just kind of think about as they're looking at technology, as they're looking at their teams, all of this?
One thing that I think needs to happen that I don't see a lot of companies doing is like prioritizing the needs of the most marginalized people in the workplace. I see, and I work with a lot of companies who think that because I'm a leader or I created this company, I know what's best for this company in every aspect of the organization. And I think that that's false. Like I was in a workshop and I had the CEO of this company was in the workshop, and he said to me, one of the things we were talking about was how to create equity systemically. And one of the things I mentioned was doing away with referral programs, and how just in my experiences, and there's research on this, how referral programs, especially in homogenous white organizations, tend to just lead to the hiring of more white people if you're trying to get more sort of cultural and racial and ethnic diversity. And I said this, and the CEO interrupted me and said, Janice, I'll tell you right now, we get the majority of our employees from referral programs, and we are not doing away with them.
Wow.
And I was just like, okay, I mean, you found me, you're paying me to deliver this information to you. If you don't want to listen to it, it is what it is. You know what? Like, I can't force you to do anything you don't want to do. So I think that understanding and realizing that we have to prioritize the needs of the most marginalized. What are you actually doing to not just find the people, but to make sure that they feel supported? Because if you are creating, or you're hiring people into very harmful and violent environments, it's not like you're going to see a revolving door of them within the workplace. So like, how are we actually like centering and amplifying the most marginalized people? And I think it's not enough to survey them. A lot of companies do these engagement surveys. Are we disaggregating the data and specifically looking at, and I know, Sasha, you posted that CNBC article from a few days ago. Are we lumping all POCs in one category? Because what I experience as a Black woman millennial employee is not going to be the same as what a baby boomer who is of East Asian descent experiences. Our experiences may be similar, but I think that like lumping all of us into one category. So are you like, what is it that we want and that we need, and we what will make us feel more supported and what will help us to develop? And I don't think a lot of companies are prioritizing our needs. They think that because they're leaders and they're in leadership positions, they know what's best. But I think that prioritizing our needs and then leaning into the expertise of outside and external people. And I'm not saying this because I'm an external consultant, but I work within a university, and I understand firsthand how difficult it is to make change when you're inside an institution or an organization. I'm not saying it's impossible. I think it's very, 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 very difficult for you as a person internally to create change. How am I going to change the people that sign my checks? And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I just think it's very, very difficult. So I think that leaning on the expertise of outside people who can sort of shield the people who are experiencing the harm. And I think that that is so important. And a lot of companies just say, hey, we're going to hire a Black woman to do this DEI work. And we're going to she's going to be the scapegoat if things don't work. Hey, we hired her. We paid her well. Why aren't things changing? One person, it's very difficult for one person to change a toxic culture. So I think that exactly what you said, Sasha, of like thinking about it before you need it, being proactive and thinking about what inclusive management looks like. With most 99% of the companies I work with are calling me because they have an issue. It's not like, hey, we created this startup and the first thing we're thinking about is equity and inclusion, even though millennials and Gen Z and all of these generations, that's what they are prioritizing. That's what they want. It's, oh, hey, someone, is getting sued for racial discrimination. And now we want to prioritize this. So no, it's like when companies, when Uber was created, for example, they weren't thinking about inclusive management. They were thinking about creating a profitable product. And I understand, but I also think that like, given the state of the world, people are not standing by and allowing companies to mistreat them anymore. And people are more vocal than ever. We have social media. So like, you don't want to be part of or leading a company that just didn't prioritize these sorts of things. So I think being proactive and then prioritizing the needs of the most marginalized, and then leaning on the expertise of folks like us who can, like, there isn't as much red tape in politics. When I go into a company, I don't know these people. I don't know who is this and that and all of that. So I think that like those are some things that companies should be doing.
One of the questions my coach asked me a couple years ago when I was in a very toxic environment was, where can you do the most good, inside or outside of the organization? And I grappled with that conversation. I mean, just grappled with that for so long, because I'm like, no, I'm in it. I can fix it. Yes. And then at the same time, my hair was falling out. I was developing ulcers. Like, I was trying to shift a company culture that was not trying to change. Like, they were happy with where they were, and they had a system in place that if they got sued, there was enough money in the coffer to take care of that and move that person on, right? And it won't go out into the PR sphere. So I think that now that I'm out, it's exactly what you're saying, Janice. Like, we can call out some of the challenges that people that are in it and living it can't do. I'm working with the organization now where we're doing psychological safety. And before we're even doing the work, I'm talking to every single person on this, because it's a small team.
Yeah.
talking to every person of color that's on their team. And I just like, you and me, let's talk. I want to hear your experiences because I want to make sure that that is centered in this larger group work. Right. And one of them said to me, no one has ever thought about us like that.
Mm.
And that's a powerful thing, right? If this work is supposed to make people feel included and valued and belong in whatever term we want to use this week, then do the work to do that, right? Like that's what we need to do. So I'm going to wrap this up a little bit. And one of the things that I always ask my guests when we do these shows is, well, this work is hard. As you can see, like we're all very passionate about it. We all are excited and want to do good things, but it takes a lot out of us, right? And so what do you do to fill your cup, right? So I have my cup. It has stuff in it. But what do you do to fill your cup, right? What do you do to kind of replenish yourself? Because this can take so much out of you. And it feels like an ongoing battle, right? So Janice, I want to start with you and then Christina.
Well, one of the best things I did when COVID hit was I removed the news notifications from my phone. I'm just like, it was really bothering me seeing everything that was going on with the current administration, and just every other day I would wake up and, seeing the death toll with COVID, it was just very anxiety inducing for me. So I just removed that. And I find that if I might miss things that are going on because I'm not completely plugged in. LinkedIn helps me because people will post stuff and I'll research it, but I want to actively be the one to do that. So that helps. I also just don't argue with people online. When you're doing this work, I feel like trolls come out in many forms, and I'm like, argue with your mother. I'm not going to be arguing back and forth with you. So you can just like talk to yourself, so that's what I do. I don't argue with people back and forth. And then I just don't on Sundays, I make sure like Sunday is my rest day, and I just don't I disconnect on Sundays. I don't really try to check social media. I find something that some sort of reality TV show that I can find and just watch it, and it takes my mind off of everything that's going on. And I feel that having that moment and that ability and that space to sort of disconnect is really helpful for me. And then sometimes I take breaks from writing because I love to write, but sometimes I just have to disconnect, and I get burnt out. So that's some of the things that I do.
Thank you. And Krista, I love, the spirituality. I love that. And the internet diet. Yes, you gotta, because it can consume you, right? It can definitely consume you. And coffee, even though I'm not a coffee drinker. Yeah. What about you, Christina?
Similarly, I definitely turn all my notifications off. I don't get social media notifications. I don't get anything but emails, text messages, and a calendar event. I have to physically go into an app to know something happened there. I am a digital nomad. And so I travel often, and I travel on purpose, not just for cultural curiosity, which is obviously, of course, part of my motivation, but it's also for healing. I travel so that I can explore and find love and light and beauty in the world through art and through architecture and through food and just scenes and sunsets that I haven't seen before in different places. And that helps me remember that my context is relative to my environment. So I happen to be born in the United States, which happens to be a racist ass country, right? So that's my reality. However, I also can find pockets within the States and pockets all over the world that can bring me back to my truest self, which is a person that's full of joy, right? And that has light and love. And I remind myself that I can find love and light in places around me, and it's not I'm not stuck. I just try to remind myself I'm not stuck. Because it is really burnt out in this space. I mean, it's easy to get burnt out in this space. The other thing that that's more immediate that I'm able to tap into is my testimonials, right? I know I do good work. I am constantly validated in the fact that I do good work. And so I'm able to go and watch a video testimonial, replay of recent training that I've done, something, and it brings me back to my why, because it's my community and it's my clients that are my why. It's not the investors that don't get it, right? It's not some imaginary figure of power that doesn't understand my plight. It's the people that have actually experienced what I have to offer that matters at the end of the day. And that keeps me grounded and prevents me from throwing in the towel when those days that are really, really hard. And I don't know if I can keep going to do it because the stress levels are so high. So I'm thankful. I'm thankful for my unpacking community. And I am, I'm motivated because I really believe in the power of our collective good and each of us taking responsibility to make our future better.
I love it. Yeah. When you said things that bring you joy, I had a little bit of a chuckle because one of my cousins is in the chat. I saw her in there. And that's her thing, right? It's like, what brings you joy? And she does the home organizing, Marie Kondo. And that's one of the things that I tap into is like every Saturday, my cousins, we have a family chat. And we could talk about anything, right? And most of the time I'm just like, I'm so glad this is not recorded because people think that our family was just a little out there. But, it's one of those things that I look forward to every week. We laugh, we have a really good time. We talk about everything under the sun. But that's kind of my escape, right? Like I'm not thinking about work. I'm not thinking about those things. Someone just put in there, I can't remember who was it, Dejanay, about the spa. That was something that I invested in, right? A monthly spa date. Once a month, right? It's just like, okay, if it's a Friday or whatever day it is, I know that that's the day, okay, that I'm going and taking care of me. And so it's those little things that we need to do. So and I'm also going to plug next week's DEI After 5, because we're talking to Dr. Rufus Spann. The episode is with Dr. Rufus Spann that talks about wellness and self-care in this work, because it's so critical for us to be able to do those things, to separate ourselves from the work on occasion and being able to get back and rejuvenate so that we can feed others. So just want to do that little bit of plug. And so folks can subscribe so that they get that notification. So Janice and Christina, I want to thank you so much for being here. How can people, before I end this, how can people get in touch with you? So Christina.
Yeah, our website is unpacking.co, and you are able to set up a discovery call with us. You can see our email at the bottom of our homepage. You can check out our testimonials. Our next anti-racism accelerator is coming up in February, so you can apply by the deadline that's featured there. And I do corporate trainings and I do small business training. So whatever you need, come and holla at your girl. But our social media is at unpacking_quote. And then if you're looking to tag me directly, it's at Christina with a K X Will. Thank y'all.
Thank you. And Janice, how can folks connect with you?
Folks can find me on all the places, but I don't trust any of these social media platforms because you know what it is. So you can find me on my website,
Big brother.
drjanicegassam.com, and all my stuff is up there. So I would love to connect with people, join my mailing list, because again, some of the stuff that gets posted that I post, I'm sure that we all post, somehow disappears from these platforms, so I think going through and connecting with us on our personal websites is best.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. I just saw another comment. Hey, Joanne, that's my other cousin. That was just like, yo, I'm here too. So I just want to make sure I put that out there so I don't hear about that on the family call. So thank you both for being here. This is truly an honor. I love having you all as my first guest on our first live. I know there were some technical difficulties, but you know, we got through
Mercury
it.
retrograde.
So, yes, right. So thank you both for this, and thank you all that have joined. This has been absolutely phenomenal. I've loved the comments. Please be sure to subscribe so that you get these the notifications for these. We're going to try to do as many lives as we can, but every week on Tuesdays at 5:15 p.m. Eastern, we have a new episode. So like I said, the episode today is Lolita Chandler, who talks about the history of DEI. And next week is Dr. Rufus Spann, who's talking about wellness and healthcare. Health and talking about wellness and self-care in this space as practitioners. So I want to thank you again, another cousin. Hey, Mark, because I know they're going to come after me. So thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Wow.